Greetings, traveler of the void. You have entered the domain of void-born terrors. What you are about to hear was pulled from a derelict Vox Thief recorder, found drifting in the wreckage of an inquisitorial black ship. The Ordo Malleus disputes its authenticity. The Adeptus Administratum has filed a claim of forgery. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica has declined to comment. We present it unredacted. Judge for yourself. The voice you are about to hear belongs to a man named Corvin Vey. A small man, a counter of things. He did not know when he began his final audit that he was the thing being counted. Steel your nerves, gather your resolve, and let us enter the silence. Chapter 1. The Auditor's Arrival. I am writing this aboard the indomitable Penance, a Cobra-class destroyer whose better centuries lie 9,000 years behind her, and whose machine spirit, I suspect, is held together now only by habit and the stubborn superstition of her engine seers. The ship's warp drive breathes 3 decks below me. I can hear it through the bulkhead against which my cheek is pressed. A slow, wet, organic thrum, in, out, like the lung of some great beast submerged in cold water. It has not stopped in the 11 days since we slipped into the Imperium. I do not believe it can stop. I believe that if it stopped, the ship would come apart around me. Because the ship is now only an extension of that breathing. And the breathing is the only thing holding the ship's idea of itself together. I have begun to suspect, and I confess this only because a journal, by the Administratum's own directive, is a place where suspicions may be recorded without consequence, that the drive breathes slightly out of time with me. Not by much. A half-beat, a quarter-beat, the smallest increment a man can measure with his own pulse and the rhythm of his own small animal body. When I breathe in, it breathes in a heartbeat later. When I breathe out, it lingers, as though reluctant to exhale until it is first confirmed that I have. I have checked this against my chrono. I have counted. I am, if I am anything, a counter, and my count is reliable. The drive breathes after me. It is, I have decided, the most frightening thing I have ever experienced. I do not know why. A man of my training should find the miscount of a machine's spirit a technical matter, to be flagged in the appropriate sub-paragraph of Form 44 bis and forwarded to the nearest Adeptus Mechanicus liaison. I have drafted this form 3 times. I have not sent it. The drafts are stacked beside my cot. When I looked at them yesterday, or perhaps the day before, the ship's chrono and my own have begun to disagree in small, plausible ways. The top draft read, Form 44 bis, Machine Spirit Rhythmic Anomaly, and the draft beneath it read, Form 44 bis, Machine Spirit Rhythmic Anomaly, and the draft beneath that read, Form 44 bis, Machine Spirit Rhythmic Anomaly. And I realized that I had been writing the same draft over and over, without remembering the previous one, and that I had been doing this, perhaps for days. I am trying not to think about what this means. I am, in any case, Adept-Auditor Primus Corvin Vey of the Adeptus Administratum, Segmentum Obscurus Audit Bureau, Subsector Tenebris branch. I am 43 standard years old. I have spent 26 of those years in the service of the Imperial Ledger. I have reconciled the tithe returns of 11 subsectors, flagged 317 discrepancies, uncovered 2 cases of clerical heresy, and buried 1 magos administrorum whose numbers did not add up. I have received the commendation of the correct column twice. My superiors describe me, in their periodic evaluations, as useful, replaceable, and precisely the right size. I have always taken this as praise. I take it as praise still. I am being sent, have been sent, am now in the final hours of being sent, to a place called Stylus Obscura, an inquisitorial research asteroid, sunk into the frozen crust of a nameless ice ball in the Tenebris-VIII system. The station's purpose is not listed on my dispatch writ. Its staffing level is 142 souls. The station's census has reported 142 souls for every audit cycle in living administrator memory. There has never been a recorded deviation, not upward, not downward. For 800 years, 142. My superiors find this statistically implausible. They have dispatched me to explain it. They have also, in the fine print of the dispatch writ, noted that the station's last 3 auditors filed their reports on schedule and returned to duty without incident. I read this clause on my first night aboard the Penance. I have reread it 7 times since. It is correctly worded. It is signed by the appropriate authorities. It bears the seal of the Subsector Audit Bureau in genuine administratum blood wax. I have verified the wax's composition against the standard reference on my slate. The clause is entirely in order. It is also, I have begun to suspect, a lie. I have no evidence for this. The files of the 3 previous auditors are sealed, as is standard. Their subsequent postings are listed in vague terms. Reassignment to interior audit duties, which is also standard. Everything is standard. Everything is in order. And yet the clause reads to me, each time I return to it, as though it were written by someone who had never met an auditor, who had only been told what an auditor was, and who was doing their best to produce a reassuring sentence in a language they did not quite speak. I have closed the dispatch right. I do not intend to open it again. The confessor assigned to the penance is a man named Ansel Droth. He has not left the ship's chapel since we translated into the warp. He sleeps there. He eats there. He performs his offices there, with the chapel door sealed and the little brass grill at its center, sliding open only at mealtimes, when a silent servitor pushes a tray of recaf and ration paste through the slot. I have attempted to speak with him twice. The first time he responded through the grill in a voice that sounded as though he had been weeping for a very long time and was trying, with limited success, to pretend he had not. He recited the litany of the Emperor's mercy at me and closed the grill. The second time, 2 days later, he did not respond at all. I asked the ship's master-at-arms whether Confessor Droth was well. The master-at-arms, a woman named Hessa, whose face has been rebuilt twice by the ship's chirurgeon, and whose smile consequently does not quite fit her mouth, told me that Confessor Droth was as well as any confessor ever was on this particular run. I asked what she meant by this particular run. She looked at me for a long moment with her ill-fitting smile. Then she said, "The Stylus run, Auditor. We've done it 41 times. Every confessor we've carried has gone into the chapel on the first day and come out on the last. None of them have ever disembarked with us at Stylus. They ride back. They don't speak the whole way home. We've stopped asking them to." I asked what they had seen to make them like that. She said, "I don't know, Auditor. I'm a crew. I don't go down to the asteroid. I just fly the ship there and fly the ship back. Whatever it is, it's for you. It's for the ones who go down." I thanked her. I returned to my cabin. I did not sleep that night. I spent it instead drafting Form 44 Biz for the 4th time, and then for the 5th. We made real space translation at 0444 ship local, which is a time I mention only because the chrono read 0444 when I looked at it, and 0444 when I looked at it again 3 hours later, and 444 the next time I checked, and I have now stopped checking the chrono altogether. The ship's navigator, a member of one of the minor houses, a navigator trivial by rank, hooded and masked as is proper, came out of the navigator's spire for the first time in the voyage to oversee the exit. I passed him in the corridor. His hood was low. His mask was in place. But the third eye beneath the mask was, I think, open. I could feel it looking at me as I walked past. It felt the way a picked lens feels when you know it is recording you. A cold, neutral, documentary attention. He did not speak. I did not speak. We passed each other in the corridor of a dying ship in a dying subsector, and we each, I believe, recognized in the other a small and replaceable piece of a machine that did not care whether we arrived. Real space at Tenebris-VIII is a black so deep it seems to absorb the ship's running lights. The system has a star, nominally, a white dwarf, ancient and dim, whose radiation budget is insufficient to warm even the innermost of its 4 dead worlds. The asteroid that hosts Stylus Obscura orbits nothing in particular. It was towed here, the dispatch writ notes, 9,000 years ago, by means not specified, and locked into a synchronous orbit with a point in space where, according to the file, nothing of consequence presently resides. I have read that clause 3 times. Presently, a careful word, an administratum word, the word of a clerk who does not wish to be held accountable for what used to reside there, or what might reside there again. The asteroid itself is visible now on the forward picked slate. I dragged the slate to my cabin to study it during the approach. It is a rough oblong of black stone, perhaps 9 kilometers along its longest axis, its surface pitted with what I first took for impact craters and have since identified, with the aid of the slate's enhancement filters, as the scars of an orbital bombardment. The pattern of the scars is consistent with a planetary-grade macro-cannon barrage. The scoring is deep. The edges are glassy, fused by heat on a scale I do not have the vocabulary to describe. According to the administratum records I consulted before my departure, Stylus Obscura has never been subjected to orbital bombardment. It was towed into place, sealed, and has remained untouched by external weaponry for the full 9,000 years of its operation. The scars on its surface disagree. I have flagged this discrepancy on my slate. It is discrepancy number 1. The docking beacon of Stylus Obscura does not hail us. This is the first thing I notice on the bridge, where I have been permitted to stand for the approach as a courtesy to my rank. Captain Orlith Varn, an aged man whose augmetic jaw whines softly when he speaks, informs me of this with the weary air of a man who has long since ceased to find the fact remarkable. "It never hails, Auditor," he says. "Not once in 41 runs. We send the handshake. They don't reply. And then the grapnel reaches out and takes us." "The grapnel," I repeat. "You'll see. Just don't be alarmed when the deck jerks. It's not us. It's them. They pull us in." I was in fact alarmed when the deck jerked. It jerked hard enough that I had to grip the rail of the bridge's sensorium pit to keep my footing. Through the forward viewport, I could see the black bulk of the asteroid swelling toward us, with the slow, unhurried inevitability of a mouth closing around a morsel. Somewhere in that black surface, a panel had irised open. A mechanical arm, articulated in ways that did not look to me like any human engineering I had studied, had extended out across the void. It had found the penance. It had taken her, and now it was drawing her in, inch by measured inch, without fanfare, without running lights, without so much as a vox hail. I looked at the arm on the picked slate. It was slick, not with ice, with something darker, a film that caught the faint starlight and gave it back in oily refractions. The arm gripped the penance amidships, along her port flank, and the penance's hull, ancient, reinforced, bombardment-rated, made a small, protesting groan, like a man remembering an old injury. "Does it always do that?" I asked. "Every time," said Captain Varn. "Every time, Auditor." I filed this also as a discrepancy, though I was no longer certain what I was measuring against. The dispatch writ had said nothing about a grapnel. But the dispatch writ I was coming increasingly to suspect had said nothing about a great many things. The airlock of Stylus Obscura cycles for 13 minutes. I have noted the duration for the record. 13 minutes is an unusually long cycle. It suggests to a trained ear a pressure differential far greater than standard, as though the station's internal atmosphere were at substantially higher pressure than the ship's, and had to be slowly bled down to match. Or perhaps the other way. I did not check which direction the pressure was moving. I should have. I will admit, somewhat distracted. The smell is what distracted me. The first breath of station air, when the inner hatch finally cycled open, was ozone. That was to be expected. Every deep void station reeks of ozone, the inevitable byproduct of recycled atmosphere, overworked lumen strips, and the slow electrical decay of machine spirits that have been running too long without proper supplication. I have smelled ozone in every station I have ever audited. I know its signature. But beneath the ozone, there was something else. It was sweet, faintly. The sweetness you find in a storeroom where fruit has been stored too long, has rotted, has been removed, and has left its memory behind in the wood of the shelves. That kind of sweet. A ghost sweet. A sweet that was no longer present, but which the air remembered. I took a second breath to be certain. And yes, it was there. Not fruit, not rot. The memory of something that had once been fruit-like, and had been dead long enough to have forgotten what it was. I noticed the smell in my wrist slate. I wrote, air, ozone, with sweet undertone suggestive of long-decayed organic matter, possibly fruit, possibly hydroponics failure. I am reviewing the entry now, 3 days later, with my journal on my knee. The wrist slate's entry no longer reads fruit. It reads meat. I do not remember writing the word meat. I am trying, as I write this journal entry, to remember whether the smell was sweet in the way of fruit or sweet in the way of meat. I find that I cannot. I find that when I try to summon the memory of the first breath, what I get instead is a composite, a sweetness that is neither one nor the other, but something underneath both, some common ancestor of all the sweetnesses a human nose can recognize. I find that this composite, now that I have noticed it, is the sweetness I have been tasting in every breath I have taken since I arrived. I find that my tongue, as I write this, tastes of it. I am going to stop thinking about the smell. The smell is discrepancy number 2. I will file it, and I will move on, because a counter of things does not dwell on the things he has counted. He counts them, and he moves on, and he trusts that the pattern will emerge from the full ledger in its own time. This is the discipline of the audit. This is the only discipline I have. I intend, for as long as possible, to hold on to it. I was met at the airlock by Magos biologist Wenonehal. She is a tall woman, or what remains of a woman. The Mechanicus have rebuilt her across what I estimate to be 4 centuries of continuous service. Her left arm is brass, articulated to the shoulder. Her right eye is gone. Its socket is plated over with a small polished steel shutter that irises open and closed at irregular intervals, revealing the dull red glow of a cogitator lens beneath. Her remaining eye is human, or was once. It is the color of milk that has been left out too long in a warm room, a color that is no longer white, but has not quite committed to any other color in particular. The lower half of her face has been replaced by a brass mandible. The mandible is beautifully crafted. I say this without irony. I have audited Mechanicus accounts long enough to recognize the work of a master artificer when I see it. The mandible's joints are inlaid with silver filigree. Its teeth, for it has teeth, a full set, cast in some dark alloy, are etched with microscript litanies in high Gothic. She spoke to me through this mandible, and her voice, filtered through the brass, was clear and warm and almost human. "Adept-Auditor Primus Corvin Vey," she said. "Welcome to Stylus Obscura. The Omnissiah's blessing upon your audit, and the Emperor's mercy upon your soul." I returned the standard greeting. I noted as I did so that her mandible clicked. It clicked once just before she began to speak, as a well-tuned mandible should. The ritual cadence of the Mechanicus, a small mechanical throat clearing that precedes and authorizes speech. That click was correct. It was in the right place. It was, I will admit, almost reassuring. But the mandible clicked again while I was speaking, when it should have been silent. It clicked while I was in the middle of my return greeting. It clicked again when I paused to take a breath. It clicked a third time, softly, after I had finished. 3 clicks, in positions where no correctly functioning Mechanicus mandible should have clicked at all. I noted the clicks. I noted too that Magos Harl did not appear to notice them. Or if she did, she gave no sign. Her milk-colored eye regarded me with the calm, distant patience of an old instrument, and the clicks continued, unremarked, behind her cordial words. I will mention here, because I know where this is leading, and I wish the record to be complete, that by the end of my first day on Stylus Obscura, I had counted 37 clicks. By the end of my second day, 204. By the end of the first week, I had stopped counting, because I had noticed the pattern. The pattern was not a pattern of malfunction. The pattern was a code. Long, long, short, long, over and over. Long, long, short, long. Whenever Magos Harl was near me. Whenever her mandible was within earshot. Long, long, short, long. I did not, at first, know what the code was saying. I know now. I did not know then. I am getting ahead of myself. This is the first night. I did not know then. I knew only that the clicks did not stop, and that no one else seemed to hear them, and that when I asked Magos Harl, politely, whether her mandible required servicing, she tilted her head and replied, "The mandible is in perfect condition, Auditor. Every component of Stylus Obscura is in perfect condition. We are a very well-maintained station." The mandible clicked 3 times while she said this. Long, long, short, long, long. She smiled, I think. It is hard to tell, with a brass mandible. But the skin above the mandible crinkled, in the way that a smile crinkles a face, and her milk-colored eye softened in the way that a smile softens an eye. And I have decided, for the sake of my own sanity, to record that she smiled at me. She led me into the station. The concourse of Stylus Obscura is a long, domed chamber, perhaps 80 paces end to end, lit by lumen strips that run along the intersection of wall and ceiling. The strips are old. They pulse, rather than shining steadily. Each strip cycles through a slow rhythm of brightening and dimming, and the rhythms of the strips are not synchronized. The effect, walking down the concourse, is of moving through a space whose illumination is always slightly wrong. A little too bright in one place, a little too dark in another, and the brightness and darkness shifting as you walk, so that the corners of the room seem to breathe. The dying machine spirits of the lumen strips sputtered their last rhythmic gasps all around me, and I, counter of things, could not help myself. I counted the pulses. One strip cycled at 41 beats per minute, another at 62. A third, the one directly above the concourse's central plaza, cycled at a rate my slate's chrono could not quite stabilize, drifting between 50 and 58 beats per minute in a pattern that did not repeat. I stood beneath this third strip for perhaps 30 seconds, trying to establish its rhythm. I could not. Each time I thought I had it, the strip would skip a beat, or add one, or extend a pulse by a fraction of a second that was long enough to be noticeable but too short to be measured. After 30 seconds, I realized that the strip was not cycling in any fixed pattern, and further, that the pattern it was following was responding in some way to my attempt to measure it. The lumen strip was counting me. I looked away. I walked on. I told myself I was tired from the warp passage. I told myself the thrum of the penance's drive, which I could no longer hear and yet could still feel, was echoing in my inner ear, producing phantom rhythms where none existed. I told myself many things. I have already mentioned that I was, by this point in the evening, telling myself many things. I will not belabor the point. Magos Hall walked beside me throughout the tour. She narrated the station's features in the bland, exhaustive manner of a curator who has given the same tour many times and no longer cares whether the listener is attending. The concourse, the reclamation sumps, 2 decks below, the hydroponics tier, 3 decks above, the chapel, the commissary, the private quarters of the senior staff, the quarters assigned now to me. I asked at the appropriate intervals the appropriate auditor's questions. How many souls on staff? 142, auditor. Has that figure changed in the past 5 audit cycles? No, auditor. Has that figure changed in the past 50? No, auditor. In the past 500? No, auditor. Her answers were all correct. Her answers were all identical to the figures in my dispatch writ. Her answers were in fact so identical, so precisely word for word identical, that by the 4th or 5th exchange, I began to feel that I was not speaking to a person at all, but to a very well-trained choir servitor, one that had been programmed to respond to audit queries with the correct text and nothing more. I tested this theory once. I asked her an out-of-sequence question. Magos, what do you personally enjoy about your service on Stylus Obscura? She stopped walking. Her milk-colored eye fixed on me. Her mandible clicked, long, long, short, long. And then, after a silence that ran perhaps 4 seconds too long, she said, I enjoy the completeness of the lattice, auditor. I asked what she meant by the lattice. She said, I misspoke, auditor. I enjoy the completeness of the station's logistical network. I noted the correction. I noted the pause before the correction. I noted that the mandible had clicked, long, long, short, long, 3 times during the 4-second silence, and that the clicks had stopped the instant she resumed speaking. I filed the exchange as discrepancy number 5. She showed me the hydroponics tier because it was, she said, one of the station's particular points of pride. The tier occupied the upper third of a cylindrical chamber some 50 paces across. Nutrient vats lined the walls, stacked 6 high, their contents lit from above by rows of lumen growth strips that cast everything in a pallid green. The air here was thick. It smelled of the vats, of the wet mineral, faintly metallic reek of recycled water and synthesized fertilizer. And beneath that, once again, the sweet wrong undertone I had smelled at the airlock. Stronger here, much stronger. The memory of fruit, or the memory of meat, or whatever it was that the air of Stylus Obscura had decided to remember. The plants in the vats grew upside down. I have audited hydroponic stations before. I have seen many configurations. I have seen vertical vats, horizontal vats, rotating vats, low-gravity vats, with plants that drifted like undersea weeds. I have never seen a vat in which the plants were rooted in the upper soil tray and hung downward into the nutrient bath, their leaves curled tightly into the liquid, their roots reaching upward toward the lumen strips, as though they were straining to drink the light. I stared at them for a long moment. Magos Hall, beside me, offered her explanation without being asked. An adaptation, she said, to the station's inverted gravity plating. The vats are oriented to suit the local field. The plants thrive. You will find, auditor, that many things on Stylus Obscura are oriented to suit local conditions. We have been here a very long time. We have learned to fit ourselves to the station's preferences. I pulled out my auspex and checked the local gravity. It read 0.98 standard, normal, perfectly normal. Imperial nominal gravity, fractionally under the ship standard 1G, the way most stations calibrated their plating to ease the transition of disembarking crew. The plating was not inverted. The gravity was not inverted. The plants were simply growing the wrong way up, in an ordinary 1G field, with their roots straining toward a light they could never reach, and their leaves drowning in nutrient broth. I looked at Magos Hal. Her milk-colored eye regarded me placidly. Her mandible clicked. Long, long, short, long. I put my auspex away. I did not correct her. I did not mention the gravity reading. I do not know even now why I did not. Perhaps because I had already begun, on some level below the level of my audit-trained mind, to understand that correcting Magos Hal would not be useful. That the words coming out of her mandible were not descriptions of reality, but instructions to reality. Instructions that the station, in its long patience, had decided to obey. If Magos Hal said the gravity was inverted, then for the purposes of Stylus Obscura, the gravity was inverted, and my auspex was simply reading the surface of the station's agreement rather than the truth beneath. I filed the plants as discrepancy number 7. I did not file them as discrepancy number 6 because at this point, walking beside Magos Hal through the green-lit cylinder of the hydroponics tier, I had temporarily lost count, and I was unwilling to admit to myself that I had temporarily lost count, because losing count is the one failure an auditor cannot afford, and so I simply skipped a number and moved on.
I wonder now what discrepancy number 6 was. I wonder if there was a number 6. I wonder if the station ate it.
The chapel was worse. It was small, perhaps 12 paces square, vaulted, with a low altar at the far end, and rows of iron pews running back toward the door. The pews were empty. They had, by the dust patterns on them, been empty for a very long time. The chapel's lumens were the calmest I had yet seen on the station. They pulsed slowly and in something approaching unison, casting a steady yellow glow over the pews and the altar, and the statue that rose behind the altar against the chapel's back wall. The statue was of the Emperor. I know this because Magos Hal told me so. "This," she said, "is our effigy of the Emperor. It is very old. It was installed when the station was first commissioned." I looked at the statue. The statue's face had been worn completely smooth. Not chipped, not vandalized. Worn, the way a stone step is worn by the passage of 1,000 feet. Every feature of the Emperor's face had been rubbed away, gradually, evenly, over centuries. The brow, the cheekbones, the jaw, the mouth, all of it smoothed into a single pale oval of featureless marble, as though the face had been gently, patiently erased by an enormous hand that had stroked it and stroked it and stroked it across 9,000 years. "What wore it down?" I asked. "The air, Auditor," said Magos Hal. "The devotion of the air itself." Her mandible clicked 3 times. Long, long, short, long, long. I said nothing. I stood in the chapel of Stylus Obscura, staring at the faceless Emperor, and I felt for the first time a coldness in the base of my spine that I could not file as a discrepancy. It was not a number. It was not a measurement. It was the small animal part of my body, understanding something that the audit-trained part of my mind had not yet consented to understand. The chapel's altar, I noticed, bore a bowl of cold corpse starch. A spoon lay beside the bowl. The spoon was silver. It was very clean. It looked in the lumen light as though it had been polished recently. Polished to the exact high shine that silver achieves only when someone has taken the time to breathe on it and rub it with a soft cloth. Someone who cared about the spoon, someone who used it every day. I did not ask whose spoon it was. I did not want to know. The commissary is where I first saw the child. Magos Hall had brought me to meet the senior staff, she said, over the evening meal. The commissary was sized for perhaps 300 souls. It was empty when we entered, except for a long iron table at its center, and the 5 figures seated at the table. I knew 4 of them by dossier. I had studied their files before my departure. Magos Hall, whom I have already described. Confessor Teodric, a pale man of indeterminate age, whose eyes, I noticed as he rose to greet me, did not blink in synchrony with one another. His left eye blinked first. His right eye followed, a fraction of a second later. The delay was small enough to be written off, individually, as a tick. But he blinked many times during our introduction, and each blink carried the same delay, and the delay was identical every time, as though his 2 eyes were being operated from slightly different locations, by slightly different operators who had never quite coordinated their timing. Chief Astropath Lysora Ven, a tall woman in the grey robes of her order, her sockets sewn shut with golden wire. She did not rise. She nodded in my direction. I saw, as she did so, that the wire in her sockets was wet. A slow, steady trickle of some pale, golden fluid ran down her cheeks, along the grain of her skin, and was absorbed into the high collar of her robes before it could drip. She smiled at me, or in my direction since she could not see me, and her smile was gentle and tired and very, very old. Provost Captain Hruk of the Inquisitorial Garrison, a heavy-shouldered man in battered carapace armor, whose left hand trembled so constantly that the water in his mess cup rippled as he held it. He gripped the cup with his right hand. He gave me a nod of acknowledgement. His eyes, I noticed, did not quite settle on me. They looked past my shoulder. They kept looking past my shoulder, even as he nodded, as though something behind me had his full attention, and I was only a courtesy to be dispatched with minimal effort before he could return to watching the thing I could not see. And the 5th figure at the head of the table. I had no dossier for the 5th figure. He was a child. I would estimate perhaps 9 standard years of age. He was small, pale, red-haired, and he was dressed in a black robe edged in gold. A robe that, I realized with some discomfort, was of administratum cut, the formal vestment of a senior archivist, a garment I had seen on perhaps 3 men in my entire career, all of them in their 80s, all of them clerical grandees with decades of accumulated seniority. The robe was far too large for him. It pulled around his crossed legs on the bench. The gold edging at the cuffs had been turned back and pinned with small silver fastenings to keep the sleeves from swallowing his hands. In his right hand, he held a silver spoon. He was eating cold corpse starch from a bowl in front of him, methodically, one small spoonful at a time, with the patient concentration of a man who had been eating the same meal for a long time and had developed a very particular rhythm for doing so. He looked up as I entered. He met my eyes. I cannot describe what I felt in that moment except by saying that for a single icy instant, I had the clear sensation that my skull had been opened, gently, without pain, the way one opens a ledger, and that someone had read the contents, and had weighed the contents against some standard I did not know, and had found the contents wanting. Not inadequate, not unacceptable, just wanting, as though a column had been short by a handful of centimeters. The sensation lasted perhaps a second. Then it was gone. The child smiled at me, a small, polite child's smile, and went back to his bowl. I turned to Magos Hall. My voice, when it came, was steadier than I had any right to expect. "Who," I asked, "is the child?" There was a pause. Magos Harl's mandible clicked 4 times. Long, long, short, long. A complete repetition of whatever it was that the mandible was trying, with mechanical patience, to tell me. Then Confessor Teodric smiled, his eyes blinking out of sync, first the left, then the right, and said in a warm and cultured voice, "That is the Archivist, Auditor. He has served this station longer than any of us." I laughed. I confess it. I laughed. A short, startled laugh. The laugh of a man who has been told a joke in bad taste at a formal dinner and does not yet know whether the teller intended humor. I said something like, "Ah, a posting tradition, is it? Very droll." No one joined me. Confessor Teodric continued to smile. Lysora Ven continued to weep gold. Provost Rook continued to look past my shoulder at whatever was behind me. Magos Harl's milk-colored eye regarded me placidly, and her mandible clicked and clicked. Long, long, short, long, 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 short, long. And the child, the archivist, looked up from his spoon a second time, and his eyes were not a child's eyes. They were patient. They were very, very patient. They were the eyes of a thing that had, in fact, served this station longer than any of them, and had been waiting, perhaps for centuries, for me in particular, to walk through this particular door on this particular evening, and laugh this particular laugh. The child inclined his head to me, the faintest of bows. A formal greeting, auditor to archivist, offered correctly and with a small measure of respect. Then he returned to his meal. I took my seat at the long iron table. I ate. I do not remember what I ate. I remember that it was cold, and that it had the sweet wrong undertone I had smelled since the airlock, and that somewhere in the middle of the meal, I looked down at my spoon and realized that I was using it in the same rhythm as the child. Scrape, lift, swallow, pause, and that I had been doing so, without noticing, for perhaps several minutes. I put the spoon down. The child, at the head of the table, did not look up, but the corner of his mouth moved, a small, amused twitch. The twitch of a man who has just watched a pupil notice something important for the first time, and who is pleased, in a small and distant way, by the notice. I sit now in my assigned quarters, writing this. The cell is a coffin. That is the only word for it. Perhaps 3 paces by 2, with a cot along one wall, a washstand opposite, a small cogitator desk bolted to the floor, and a single lumen strip overhead that pulses in the dying machine spirit rhythm I now associate with every light source on this station. The strip breathes. It breathes, I have noted, at 41 pulses per minute, the same rhythm as the first strip I counted in the concourse some 2 hours ago. Above the door of the cell is a small brass plaque. The plaque bears a name. The name is Corvin Vey, spelled correctly, carved deeply into the brass. The letters have been worn soft at the edges by what looks like centuries of handling, as though many thumbs have pressed against the plaque over many years, as though the plaque is in the habit of being touched for luck, or blessing, or reassurance by successive occupants whose hands have rested on the letters of my name for just long enough to leave their mark. I stood in front of the plaque for a long time before I entered the cell. I asked Magos Harl, as she was departing down the corridor, whether the plaque was new. She did not turn. She said, "Nothing on Stylus Obscura is new, Auditor. Everything here has always been here. Your quarters are ready for you. Sleep well." Her mandible clicked 3 times as she walked away. Long, long, short, long. I have been sitting on the cot for 2 hours. The cell's lumen strip has pulsed, at 41 beats per minute by my count, approximately 4,920 times. I have counted everyone. I have not been able to stop counting. I have opened this journal. I have uncapped my pen. I have attempted to write down what I saw in the commissary. I have gotten as far as the child at the head of the table, and found that my pen has stopped. I cannot remember what came after. I cannot remember whether the child had hair, or what color it was, or what color his eyes were, or whether he was a boy or a girl, or whether he spoke or merely nodded. I know, with the confident clarity of an audit entry, that I saw him. I know that I looked at him for perhaps 30 seconds, in total, across the length of the meal. I know that my eyes were functioning normally. I know that my memory, at 43 years of age, is as sharp as it has ever been. I have audited 12,000-line ledgers from memory and passed the subsequent verification with a perfect score. I cannot remember the child's face. I remember, with absolute and painful clarity, the silver spoon.
I have written, in my journal, the only sentence I can produce with any confidence.
The spoon was very clean. I am looking at that sentence now. I have been looking at it for some time. It is a true sentence. It is a complete sentence. It is, as best I can tell, the only sentence I am capable of writing about the evening meal on my first night, aboard Stylus Obscura. The lumen strip flickers, in the moment of darkness between one pulse and the next, in the small black gap where the dying machine spirit of the strip draws its next laboring breath. I hear a voice, small, high, very close, perhaps a pace from my cot, perhaps closer. The voice speaks one word. It is not Corvin. It is a name I have not heard spoken aloud in 43 years. It is the name my mother whispered over me in the birthing creche of the hive world of my birth, a name she told me once, in secret, on the morning she was taken into the service of the Munitoria and never returned. A name she said belonged to me alone, and that I should never share with anyone, and that I should keep folded and quiet in the deepest place inside myself, like a small coin sewn into the lining of a coat. I have never written the name down. I have never spoken it. I have never in 43 years thought it aloud even inside my own head. I have, instead, folded around it and kept it warm, the way my mother told me to. The voice in the darkness between the lumen pulses speaks that name, correctly, completely, with the exact inflection my mother used, with a small, fond, almost loving note at the end, as though the speaker is glad to see me and has been waiting for me and wants me to know that I am known. The lumen strip steadies. The darkness passes. The voice does not repeat. I am sitting on the cot. My pen is in my hand. My journal is open on my knees. The cell is empty. I am alone. I can hear faintly, through the bulkhead behind my cot, the thrum of a warp drive that is not there. The indomitable Penance departed 2 hours ago. I watched her plasma trail fade from the docking viewport as Magos Hal led me here. There is no warp drive within 9 kilometers of this cell, but I can hear it breathing. And it is breathing just slightly out of time with me. I will close my journal. I cap my pen. I do not sleep. Traveler of the void, if the shadow beneath your cogitator feels longer tonight than it did yesterday, then the warding grows thin and the watch grows weary. Secure the Geller field, strike the like rune. Every soul that joins this vigil thickens the wall between us and the thing that counts in the dark. Chapter 2. The Uncounted Soul. I woke, or believed I woke, to the chime of the cell's Vox grill at 0417 station local. I do not remember falling asleep. The journal lay open on my chest. The pen was capped in my hand. The lumen strip overhead pulsed at its 41 beats per minute, and I knew, with the cold certainty of a ledger line, that it had been pulsing without interruption since the previous evening. I had then slept. The journal was the proof. A man does not sit upright on a cot for 9 hours without sleeping. The body refuses. The body is a stubborn animal, and it takes what it requires whether the mind consents or not. I lifted the journal to set it aside. The entry I had written the night before had grown. Where there had been one sentence, the spoon was very clean. There were now 3 full paragraphs. In my hand, in my ink. The ink, when I touched it, was still faintly tacky. The paragraphs described the child at the head of the table in meticulous detail. Pale, red-haired, grey-eyed, robed in black trimmed with gold, the cuffs turned back and pinned with silver. He held the spoon in his right hand. He ate with his left elbow on the table, in the manner of a man unused to formal dining. His teeth were small and very white. The handwriting was mine. The cadence of the sentences was mine. The vocabulary was mine. I did not remember writing any of it. I read the paragraphs 3 times. Each reading produced the same paragraphs. They did not shift. They did not rearrange themselves under my eye. They were stable. They were waiting to be stable, the way a witness waits to be questioned. And I understood. Sitting there on the edge of the cot at 0417 Station Local, with my own handwriting accusing me of memories I had not made, that the journal was no longer mine. I tore the page out. I folded it twice. I crossed to the washstand and held the page to the small sanitation flame that hissed beneath the basin. The vellum caught quickly. It burned with a smell of ozone and faintly, the sweet undertone of meat or fruit. I washed my face. I recited the litany of the Emperor's clear sight. I recited it twice. I dressed in my audit robes and I went to my work, because the only thing left to me was the work, and a counter of things who cannot count is nothing at all. The librarium assigned to me was a long, narrow chamber on the station's 2nd tier, lit by the same pulsing strips and lined floor to ceiling with vellum stacks and cogitator thrones. The thrones were old. Their machine spirits whined softly as I powered up the central console, and the brass scrollwork along the throne's arms was inlaid with the small skull and cog sigil of the Adeptus Mechanicus. A junior tech adept met me at the door. He was a young man, perhaps 30, with a single augmetic eye and the nervous, slightly apologetic manner of someone who has been told a great deal about a senior official and is now meeting the official for the first time. His name, he said, was Adept Karel. He had been instructed by Magos Harl to assist me with any cogitator queries I might require. He did not blink out of sequence. His hands did not tremble. He did not, so far as I could tell, click in any code. He was, in every observable respect, an ordinary tech adept on an ordinary posting. I almost wept with relief. I asked him how long he had served on Stylus Obscura. He smiled, a tired, friendly smile, and said, 4 years this cycle, Auditor. Long enough to know the corridors, not long enough to forget my name. Where would you like to begin? I told him I would begin with the census, and from there work outward through the supply manifests, the reclamation logs, and the personnel files, in that order. He nodded. He keyed open the relevant data stacks. He bowed and withdrew to his own throne 3 paces away, where he busied himself with maintenance offerings to the cogitator spirits and left me to my work. I fell into the audit the way a drowning man falls onto a plank. The numbers were a discipline. The numbers were clean. The numbers did not click in code, did not weep gold, did not sit at the heads of tables eating cold corpse starch with very clean spoons. The numbers, however, were lying. The first lie was small. The census listed 142 souls. The supply manifests recorded daily ration distribution, sufficient for 141. A single discrepancy of 1. Not an error of accounting. Accounting errors compound, drift, rebalance over time. This was a clean, persistent gap. 40 years of manifests, 141 rations distributed daily, 142 souls on the roster. One soul on Stylus Obscura was not eating. I noted the discrepancy on my slate, number 1 of the day. I felt briefly the small, pure pleasure that a counter feels when the count yields its first true return. The second lie was larger. The reclamation logs tracked all bodies sent to the corpse starch reclamators. Standard Imperial practice. The dead are returned to the living through the alchemical mercies of the Mechanicus, that nothing of the Emperor's faithful be wasted. I pulled the logs for the previous 50 years, expecting the usual statistical noise, a cluster of deaths during a void storm, a quiet decade, an outbreak of lung rot in some recycled air bay. The shape of mortality on a long-posted station. The shape was wrong. The logs recorded 1 death per year, every year, for 50 years, then for 100, then for 200. I called for the older logs. Adept Corel rose, bowed and retrieved a brass-bound data spool from the deep stacks. I loaded it. I scrolled. 500 years. 1 death per year. 1,000. 1 death per year. 2,000. 3,000. 5. 1 death per year. Every year. Without exception. Without deviation. For as far back as the records reached. Which was, when I checked the dating stamps, 9,004 standard years. I sat very still in my throne. A station of 142 souls does not lose exactly 1 soul per year for 9,000 years. The mathematics refuses. Disease, accident, the slow decay of old age. These produce variance. They cluster, they thin, they surge. 1 per year every year is not a mortality pattern. It is a quota, a scheduled return, a tithe, and 1 death per year against a static census of 142 requires 1 replacement per year. 1 soul drawn into Stylus Obscura every year for 9,000 years without record of arrival. I checked the arrival logs. The arrival logs recorded 1 auditor every 734 years, plus quarterly supply runs from the indomitable Penance and her predecessors. Crew did not disembark. Confessors did not disembark. Only the auditor stepped off the ship, and only the auditor's report ever rode back. There was no record, anywhere in the manifests, of the 9,000 replacement souls. I rose from the throne. I told Adept Corel I required a brief recess. He nodded without looking up from his maintenance prayers. I walked the length of the librarium twice. The lumen strips pulsed. My pulse, when I checked it against my chrono, was running at 62 beats per minute. The strips overhead, I noticed without wanting to notice, were also pulsing at 62. I returned to the throne. I told myself I had been mistaken. I called up the personnel files. The personnel files were the third lie, and the worst of them. I pulled the first file at random. Junior Engine Seer, Harek Os. Posted to Stylus Obscura, current cycle. Responsible for Lumen Grid Maintenance, lower decks. I knew the name. Harek Os had sat next to me in the Administratum Scholam on the hive world of my birth. He had been a thin, anxious boy with a stutter. He had failed his second-year cogitator rites and been reassigned to the Munitoria. I had not thought of him in 25 years. I could not have named him aloud if asked. I pulled the second file, Assistant Astropath Lyrian Velt. A girl I had loved, briefly, terribly, when we were both 16. She had been transferred to a distant agri-world. I had never learned what became of her. The third file, Kitchen Servitor Designate Maela Vey. My mother's name. I sat with my hand on the throne's input key for a long time. I do not know how long. The lumen strip above me pulsed, and pulsed, and pulsed, and I counted without meaning to. And somewhere around the 420th pulse, I noticed that Adept Quirrell was no longer at his throne. I was alone in the librarium. I pulled another file. Auspex rating Tertian Joran Kell. The name of the boy who had cheated me at dice the night before my conscription. I had not thought of him in over 20 years. Another, Confessor's Aide Versatile, my first cogitator tutor. Another. Every file was a name from my life. Every posting on Stylus Obscura had been filled by someone I had once known. The schoolmate, the lover, the tutor, the dice cheat, the mother. Every face I had ever learned and let go of. Every name my memory had filed and forgotten. Here. Posted to junior duties on a station I had never heard of until 12 days ago. I told myself it was a coincidence. I told myself the galaxy is vast, and the supply of human names is finite. I told myself many things. I have already mentioned that I was, by this point, telling myself many things. Then I pulled the file with my own name on it. Vey, Corvin, Adept-Auditor Primus. Current. My face, in cogitator monochrome, stared back at me from the identification plate. The image was a younger me, perhaps 30 years old, taken from an administratum personnel pict I remembered being made in a small rendering bay on Terra on the morning I had received my Auditor Primus rank. The fingerprints listed were mine. The retinal pattern was mine. The psychic signature, the faint, almost flat scrap of warp presence that even non-psyker souls leave on Imperial records, was mine. The date of birth was mine. The date of death was 734 years ago. I read the line 3 times. Date of termination of service, 9.244.M41, estimated. Cause, natural cessation following extended audit posting. Replacement scheduled. The librarian was very quiet. I laughed. I do not know why. A small, dry, professional laugh. The laugh of a man encountering a clerical error of impressive scale. The laugh echoed in the long chamber, and the echo came back to me at slightly the wrong rhythm, lagging perhaps a half beat behind, the way the warp drive of the penance had lagged behind my breathing in the days before my arrival. I closed the file. The cogitator hummed, a faint, apologetic whine. The throne's machine spirit, I realized with slow clarity, was embarrassed. It had shown me something it had not meant to show me, and it was now correcting itself, the way a junior clerk corrects a misfiling before a superior can see. I reopened the file. Vey, Corvin, thou, Adept-Auditor Primus, current. Birth date, mine. Fingerprints, mine. Retinal pattern, mine. Psychic signature, mine. The line for date of termination was blank. The previous text had been replaced by a single word in the same monochrome script, pending. I sat in the librarium for what my chrono later told me was 3 full hours, looking at that word. I left the librarium at the 7th hour. I did not collect my notes. I did not log out of the cogitator throne. I walked. I walked because I needed answers, and the cogitator was no longer giving them, and I had 3 living people on this station whose mouths might still produce truth. I walked toward the inquisitorial garrison level, where Provost Captain Hruk maintained, according to the manifests, a personal office with a Vox link to the wider sector. I did not reach his office. I glimpsed him 3 times. The first time, he was turning the corner ahead of me. A flash of carapace, the trembling left hand, gone before I could call out. The second time, he was just stepping into a lift shaft as I rounded into a junction. The doors closed before my voice could carry. The third time, he was at the far end of a long maintenance gallery, 100 paces distant, looking back at me. and as I raised my hand, he turned a corner that, when I reached it 3 minutes later, opened onto a sealed bulkhead. There was no corner. The bulkhead had been there for centuries. The dust on its hinge bolts had not been disturbed in living memory. I went, instead, to the astropath. The chief astropath's sanctum was a circular chamber on the station's upper tier, its walls inscribed in the rust-dark ink of soul wards laid down over thousands of years and renewed layer over layer until the sigils had grown thick as bark. The air inside reeked of ozone, sharp, clean, different from the sweet-wrong reek of the rest of the station, as though the wards held that particular contamination at bay. Lysora Ven sat at her choir throne in the chamber's center. Her sewn-shut eyes wept their slow gold. She did not turn as I entered, but she said before I had spoken, "Auditor, you have come more quickly than I expected. The numbers have begun to bite then." I asked her how she knew. She said, "I am blind, Auditor. I have been blind for 94 years. I have learned to listen. The station's ambient rhythm changes when an auditor begins to truly count. There is a small, dry sound, like a coin dropped into a deep well. I heard it some hours ago. I sat on the visitor's stool opposite her throne. My hands, I noticed, were shaking. I asked her plainly when the station had last received an astropathic transmission from outside. She did not hesitate. 407 years ago, Auditor, and outgoing transmissions. I send one daily, as ritual demands. I have sent one daily for 94 years. My predecessor sent one daily for the 112 before me. Her predecessor for the 140 before her. The transmissions go out. They are received by no one we can identify. They receive replies? One reply, Auditor. Always the same reply. A single voice, speaking a single word, in a language I do not recognize. I have been trying to translate the word for 2 centuries. I have made progress. The lumen strip in the sanctum pulsed, slow, steady. I could not tell whether it was synchronized with my pulse or with hers, and I did not suddenly want to know. I asked what she thought the word meant. The chief astropath was silent for a long time. The gold ran from her sockets, traced the lines of her cheekbones, vanished into the high collar of her robes. Then she spoke. "I think it means still, as in to remain, or perhaps as in silence, or perhaps both. It is a word, Auditor, that I have come to think is not spoken to me. I think it is spoken to itself. I think the thing in the warp is reminding itself to be still. I have come to suspect, in these last few decades, that when it finishes reminding itself, it will stop being still, and it will do whatever the opposite of being still is." I left her sanctum. I do not remember walking back to my quarters. I remember that my hands were no longer shaking. They had passed through trembling into a kind of numb, weighted calm, as though the small animal of my body had decided to conserve its energies for whatever was coming. The child found me in the corridor outside my cell. He was seated cross-legged on the deck, the black robe pooled around him, his bowl of cold corpse starch balanced on one knee. The silver spoon worked methodically. He looked up as I approached. He smiled. "Hello, Corvin. Have you found us yet?" I asked what he meant. He tilted his head. "In the numbers. Have you found us?" I told him, because I had no shield left but the ledger, and the ledger was failing, that I had found 93 discrepancies. The child laughed. A real laugh. A child's laugh. Bright and delighted and utterly without malice. 93, he said. "That's very close. Keep counting, Corvin. You'll know us when you reach the right number. We'll be the one that isn't there." He stood, carrying his bowl. He walked past me down the corridor. I watched him go. He cast no shadow under the pulsing lumens. None at all. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I have already mentioned that I was telling myself many things. I will not belabor the point. The commissary at 2100 was empty. The long iron table stretched the length of the hall. The bowls were not laid. The spoons were not laid. The senior staff had not come to supper. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, then walked the length of the hall, counting the chairs. 141. I counted again, slower, touching the back of each chair. 141. I sat in one. I closed my eyes. I recited the litany of the correct column. I opened my eyes. At the far end of the hall, against the bulkhead I had walked past twice, sat a chair I had not counted. It was pulled back slightly from the table, as though someone had just risen from it. A bowl sat at the place setting. Cold corpse starch. The bowl was warm to the touch when I crossed and laid my hand against it. Steam rose faintly from its surface in the slow lumen pulse. A silver spoon lay beside the bowl, very clean, polished to a high shine that no spoon achieves by accident. I stood for a long time at the head of that empty place. I did not sit. I did not touch the spoon. I counted, in my head, the chairs of the commissary one final time, and the count came out to 142. I opened my slate. I scrolled to the discrepancy log. I added the chair. The entry numbered 93. I stared at it. 93. Just as I had told the child. The lumen strip overhead flickered. In the dark gap between one pulse and the next, the slate's display flickered too, and the entry number changed. When the light returned, the discrepancy log read 94. 94. I had not added an entry. I had not pressed the key. The slate had filed something I had not seen, in the dark between the pulses, and recorded it as the 94th discrepancy of my audit. I did not check what the entry contained. I could not. Some small, sane part of me, the last small, sane part, refused to let my finger move toward the screen. I closed the slate. I left the commissary. I walked back to my cell. The brass plaque above the door bore my name, Corvin Vey, and I noticed for the first time that the letters had been polished today. Polished recently. Polished to the same high shine as the spoon. Someone had cleaned my name while I was at work. I entered the cell. I locked the hatch. I sat on the cot. I opened my journal to record the day's audit. The pen stopped at the date. I could not remember whether today was my second day on Stylus Obscura, or my third, or my seventh. The chrono on my slate read the second. My body, sore, hollow, the small animal of me too tired for 2 days of waking, insisted on the seventh. I sat with the pen poised over the vellum, and I tried to count the meals I had eaten since arrival, and I found that I could remember only one. The first, the cold corpse starch, and the very clean spoon. I had eaten since. Of course I had eaten. The body does not lie about hunger, but the meals would not come. The lumen strip pulsed. In the dark gap, a small, high voice, close, very close, perhaps a pace from the cot, spoke a single word. It was not my name this time. It was the word the chief astropath had been translating for 2 centuries. Spoken not to me, spoken to itself. The word an old patient thing whispers to remind itself to remain. The voice said, "Still." The lumen strip steadied. I closed my journal. I sat in the dark. I waited for the third day. Traveler, the warding holds, but the strain shows. If this chronicle is worth the silence you have given it, join the crew. Subscribe. Strike the bell. No vessel turns back a warp storm with a half-empty bridge. Chapter 3. The Dream in the Vault. The summons came on vellum. It had slid beneath the hatch of my cell during what passed for night. Though I had not slept, had not closed my eyes, had sat upright on the cot with my journal closed on my knees, and counted lumen pulses until the count exceeded 20,000, and I lost the thread. The vellum was dry to the touch. The seal was Mechanicus blood wax, cog and skull, pressed deep. The script inside was Magos Harl's hand. I had seen it on the supply manifests. Precise, cold. The letters formed by a brass stylus rather than a human grip. Adept-Auditor Primus Vey. Your presence is required in the vault of Stylus Obscura at the 11th hour. Bring your cogitator wand. Bring your audit seal. Bring any personal items of sentimental value. O Harl, Magos Biologis. I read the last clause 4 times. Sentimental value. The Mechanicus do not write such phrases. The Mechanicus do not acknowledge the concept. Sentiment is a flesh failing, a corrosion of pure cognition. Their litanies are explicit on this point. To find such words on a Mechanicus summons was to find a heretic glyph carved into a confessional. The phrase had been written by Magos Harl's hand. It had not, I felt with cold certainty, been written by Magos Harl's mind. I considered refusing. I considered more seriously requesting emergency extraction. Then I remembered that the indomitable penance had departed 2 days ago, that the next supply run was 407 standard days from now, and that there was no vessel in this dead system to extract me to. I was alone on a black asteroid, with 141 souls who were not eating, and 1 soul who was, and the only thing left to me was to walk down to the vault and see what wished to be seen. I packed the wand. I packed the seal. I considered for a long time what counted as sentimental. In the bottom of my kit bag, wrapped in a square of oiled cloth, was a small copper coin. I had carried it for 43 years. It bore the worn face of a hive-world saint whose name I had long since forgotten, and the milling at its edge had been rubbed smooth by the constant pressure of my thumb. I did not know why I had kept it. I had no clear memory of acquiring it. I unwrapped the coin. I held it in my palm. The face was so worn that the features had become abstract. A curve where a brow had been, a depression where a mouth might have rested. I tilted it to the lumen strip. The wear pattern caught the light at a particular angle, and for a moment I had the distinct, ridiculous impression that the face on the coin resembled my own. I dismissed the thought. I pocketed the coin. My hand, I noticed, had moved before I had decided. I went down to the vault. Magos Harl waited at the lift shaft entrance. Her mandible clicked once in greeting, long, long, short, long, and she said without preamble, "You are punctual, Auditor. The lattice rewards punctuality." I asked what the lattice was. She said, "You will see." The lift descended for 9 minutes. 9 minutes is not a short ride. Stylus Obscura, by the schematics I had reviewed, was at most 4 decks deep beneath the docking concourse. I had been counting lift rides since my arrival. The standard descent from concourse to reclamation took 2 minutes, 13 seconds. I asked Magos Harl, conversationally, how deep we were going. She said, "As deep as is required, Auditor." The lift continued. I counted. At the 7-minute mark, I felt the gravity shift. Subtly. The pull beneath my feet did not weaken. It changed direction by perhaps 2 degrees, then 4, then 8, as though the deck I was standing on was slowly tilting beneath me. I caught myself against the lift's brass railing. Magos Harl did not move. Her single milk-colored eye tracked me with placid interest. By the time the doors opened, My Auspex registered local gravity at 0.98 standard, oriented 31 degrees off the station's nominal vertical. We were not below the station any longer, we were beside it. The vault, whatever it was, did not lie in any direction the schematics acknowledged. The reek hit me first. Ozone, sharp and choking. Beneath it, the sweet undertone of meat or fruit that I had been tasting since the airlock, but stronger here, concentrated, the way a tincture is more potent than the herb it was distilled from. And beneath that, and this was new, this was something I had not encountered in the upper decks, the unmistakable copper tang of human blood. Fresh, a great deal of it, continuously fresh. I breathed shallowly. I followed Magos Hal down a corridor whose walls were not Imperial. I do not know how else to describe them. The metalwork was wrong. The plates fit together at angles that the eye registered as correct only by stages, the brain agreeing to a geometry it had not been consulted on. The sigils carved into the bulkheads shifted when I looked at them directly, not moving exactly, but settling, as though they had been one shape an instant before, and were pretending now to have always been another. I tried to read one. The sigil resolved briefly into the high Gothic letter for S, then for T, then for a letter I did not recognize, in no alphabet I had studied, then back to S. I stopped trying to read them. Magos Hal ahead of me said without turning, "The station has several machine spirits, Auditor. The one below us is the oldest. Its blood tax is small, but it is continuous. You are tasting the tithe." I asked whose blood. She did not answer. She did not need to. I understood as I walked that the one death per year on the reclamation logs was not metaphor, was not bookkeeping, was an appointment kept punctually for 9,000 years, and the blood I was tasting in the back of my throat was the cumulative residue of 9,000 kept appointments, distilled into the air of the lower decks and circulated by the same lumen-pulsed life support that fed my lungs. I had been breathing it for 3 days. The vault door was not Imperial either. It was tall, perhaps 4 times my height, and oval, set into the corridor's terminal bulkhead like an iris. The metal was black, but not painted black. The substance of it was black, in the way that very old iron sometimes goes black through millennia of slow oxidation. The door bore no hinges. The door bore no seam. Magos Hal approached it, raised her brass arm, and recited a Mechanicus cant in a register I could not follow. The door did not open. The door remembered that it had once been open. It is the only way I can describe it. The black surface flickered briefly, as though uncertain what shape to hold, and then a portion of it ceased, simply ceased to be there, and a doorway-shaped absence stood in its place. Beyond the absence, a domed chamber, perhaps 30 paces across, lined with Psyward scripture in gold leaf, so thick that it caught the lumen light like the inside of a reliquary. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a stasis field, the color of dirty ice, floated a piece of bone. It was no larger than my fist. It was black, the same impossible black as the door, and it was the wrong shape for any skull I had ever studied. Too many curves where curves should not be. Too many small, perfectly circular holes, arranged in a pattern that the eye refused to memorize. I tried 3 times to count the holes. I got different numbers each attempt. The stasis field, by every principle of Mechanicus theory I had ever audited, should have rendered the object inert, sealed, severed from the wider universe by a bubble of suspended time. I could hear it, not with my ears. The hearing was lower than that, behind my teeth, between my eyes, in the soft tissue under my tongue. The splinter of bone was humming, a small, patient, almost tuneful hum. The hum had words in it. The words were not in any language I knew, but I understood them. In the way one understands a memory that has been buried so long, it speaks now without translation. The splinter was counting. It was counting me. It reached a number I had not known I possessed, a number I could not have named 10 heartbeats earlier, but which I now knew, now, forever, with the same certainty with which I knew my own name. And the humming paused, and then resumed, and began the count again, from the beginning more slowly, as though to be certain, as though I were a ledger line whose total deserved double-checking. I stood in the doorway. I did not move. My hand, in my pocket, had closed around the copper coin. I did not remember reaching for it. Magos Harl spoke. Her voice carried something I had not heard in it before. Not warmth, not exactly. Reverence, or fear, or both. I had long since stopped being able to tell these apart. This, she said, is the Cacodominus fragment. A splinter of a xenos mind thing that the Emperor himself silenced 9,000 years ago, in the long age before the Great Crusade. The Inquisition did not destroy the creature, Auditor. The Inquisition preserved a piece of it, for study. Stylus Obscura was built around this vault. The vault is the reason the station exists. She turned to face me. The mandible clicked. Long, long, short, long. The 142 souls of this station are not a census, Auditor. They are a seal. The minds of the personnel form a psychic lattice, a living cage, around the splinter. The lattice prevents the splinter from dreaming outward. So long as the lattice holds, the Cacodominus sleeps. If the lattice fails, the Cacodominus wakes. If the Cacodominus wakes, 200 worlds drown in madness within a single rotation, as they did the first time. I asked carefully what my role in the lattice was. Her milk-colored eye fixed on me. She said, "When one soul of the lattice dies, another is drawn in to replace it, always. The replacement is always chosen by the splinter itself. We do not know how the splinter reaches them. We know only that the Administratum, in its blind and holy mercy, always sends us the correct one. Every 734 years, the splinter requires a new master soul, an anchor, the linchpin around which the lattice is woven. The current anchor has held for longer than any before him. He is exhausted. He is fraying. We need his replacement now. Tonight." The mandible clicked. "You are the 90th Auditor Vey. We have been waiting for you for 4 years. I did not run. I did not scream. I do not say this with pride. I say it because it was the truth, and the journal must hold the truth. I stood in the doorway of the vault, and I felt, with the clearest, cleanest cognition I had ever experienced, every one of the splinter's counting hums passed through my skull like a slow, patient needle. I understood in that moment that the choosing had not happened today. The choosing had happened on the morning of my birth. 43 years ago, on a hive world whose name I was already beginning to forget. In a birthing creche I now suspected I could not, if pressed, locate on any star chart. Every audit I had ever performed, every ledger I had reconciled, every quiet, careful night I had spent alone with my numbers, every commendation, every promotion, every sideways step that had brought me, by what I had always believed was the slow accident of a small career, to this exact doorway on this exact evening. It had been a shaping, a whittling, a patient narrowing of a soul into the precise, specific, useful shape of a linchpin. I understood this in a single instant. The understanding did not come from Harl's words. It came from the hum. And the worst of it, the deepest knife of it, the one I do not know how to write about even now, is that the understanding did not frighten me. It comforted me. It felt in some terrible soft place below my sternum, like being known, like being seen, for the first time in my small bureaucratic life. by something vast enough to see me whole. The splinter was counting the longings I had never spoken. The splinter was filing the small, lonely facts of me. The books I had not finished, the women I had not approached, the bowl of soup my mother had once left on a table I had been too proud to come back for. And it was finding room for all of them, categorizing them, holding them, keeping them. I found to my shame that I wanted it. I found to my deeper shame that the wanting was no longer entirely my own. The splinter was counting my longings now, and it was adding its own to the total. And the longings the splinter wished to feel through me were of a kind I had no vocabulary to refuse. My hand tightened on the copper coin in my pocket. The metal was warm, warmer than it should have been. I pressed my thumb against the worn face. The smoothed down features of the saint pressed back. The features felt like mine. Then the vault shuddered. Not a tremor, a flinch, as though the chamber itself had drawn breath in surprise. The stasis field around the splinter flickered, just once. In the flicker I saw the splinter grow, not by much, by perhaps the width of a hair, but in the gold leaf scripture on the walls, a single letter darkened, the gold tarnishing visibly to brown along one stroke, and the air in the vault thickened with a new smell, hot copper, wet wool, something utterly human and utterly wrong, the smell of a body that was about to remember it had been alive. And from the deck grating beneath my boots, a low moan rose, and I understood that the moan was the station itself drawing breath. Magos Harl screamed. It was the first fully human sound I had heard her make. She shrieked a Mechanicus alarm litany at the bulkhead, slammed her brass palm against a recessed console, and alarm klaxons erupted through the station, a high, ragged wail that found echoes in corridors I could not see. The lumen strips in the vault flushed from pale gold to a sick, bruised violet. The color was wrong. Lumens do not produce that color. Nothing the Mechanicus builds produces that color. The lattice is failing, Harl cried. The archivist, the old anchor, he is releasing his hold. He has found a way to release it. Emperor, preserve us. After 700 years, he has found a way. Auditor, the binding right. You must take his place now, before the splinter. She did not finish. I had already looked up at the splinter. I had to. The splinter was calling. In the splinter's black surface, polished by stasis to a mirror's perfection, I saw my own face reflected. The reflection was smiling at me. I was not smiling. I had not smiled in 3 days. My mouth, as I felt it with the small, honest part of myself that still kept its accounts, was set in the slack horror of a man who has just understood his own measure. The reflection wore my face. Every line, every grey thread in the stubble, the small scar above my left eyebrow that I had carried since the Sholam. And the reflection was smiling. The reflection's lips moved. The voice, when it came, did not come from the splinter. The voice came from inside my own skull, in the back of my own throat, in the place where I had heard the small, high voice on my first night speak the secret name my mother gave me. But the voice was a child's voice. It was the archivist's voice, the pale, red-haired child at the head of the long iron table, the boy with the very clean spoon. He spoke quickly. He spoke as a man speaks when he has only one breath left and a great deal to say. Don't let her put you in the cage, Corvin. Don't let her. I held it for 700 years so you wouldn't have to. She'll tell you it's duty. She'll tell you it's the Emperor's work. She'll mean it. She believes every word. But she's been part of the cage so long she's forgotten what the cage is for. The cage isn't holding the splinter, Corvin. The cage is teaching it. 9,000 years of holding 90 small, careful men. And it has learned us. And it is almost ready. And you are the last lesson. You are the perfect fit. the one it has been dreaming toward. Run, Corvin! Run! Magos Hal raised her brass arm. From the wall behind her, a binding stave detached itself. An ornate mechanicus relic, ribbed with copper coils, its tip crowned by a small black jewel that pulsed in rhythm with the splinter's hum. Her milk-colored eye fixed on me with an expression I had not seen in it before. Not placidity, not patience, hunger. I ran. I do not remember the corridor outside the vault. I do not remember the lift. I remember the gravity tilting beneath my feet, the deck pitching by degrees as I climbed, the alarm klaxons screaming through bulkheads I had not known were there. I remember the lumen strips above me, strobing violet gold, in a rhythm that was no rhythm. I remember the copper coin clenched in my fist so tightly that its edge had cut into the meat of my palm and was bleeding freely. The small drops scattering on the deck behind me as I ran, leaving a trail. I remember, with absolute clarity, that the trail of my own blood, when I glanced back at it, did not extend more than 3 paces behind me. The drops beyond that distance had already been absorbed. The deck was drinking them. I ran upward, toward the docking concourse, toward the only place on this station that might still matter, toward the astropath's sanctum, toward Lysora Ven, toward the blind woman with the golden tears who had been translating one word for 2 centuries, and who knew, I understood now, I understood at last, that the word was not being spoken to her. The word was being spoken to itself, and it was almost finished reminding itself to be still. Traveler, 3 chapters in, and the Geller field thins. If this transmission has held you, hold it back. Strike the like rune. Share this chronicle with one other soul who walks the void. One voice, one share, one pair of ears. That is how a Vox Thief recording survives the silence between stars. Chapter 4. The Unmaking of Corvin Vey. I ran upward through a station that was no longer a station. The corridors of Stylus Obscura had stopped pretending. The walls breathed. I do not mean this as a metaphor. The walls breathed, the bulkhead plates flexing minutely outward and inward in a slow, wet rhythm. And the rhythm was the same 41 beats per minute I had been counting in the lumen strips since my arrival. The strips themselves had gone out altogether. In their place, a directionless violet phosphorescence rose from the air itself, as though reality on Stylus Obscura had been sanded thin, and the warp was shining through the worn soft places. I passed the commissary. The door stood open. At the long iron table sat 141 figures, each in the uniform of his or her station posting, each holding a silver spoon, each eating what I now understood was not corpse starch from a bowl that had never been filled. They were skeletons. They had been skeletons for a long time. Their skulls turned as one body to track me as I ran past. The same patient, mechanical interest with which Magos Hal's milk-colored eye had tracked me on my first evening. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew with the cold animal certainty that had replaced my training that the lattice had been holding more than the splinter. The lattice had been holding the dead. 9,000 years of 1 soul per year tithes, drawn into the cage, kept upright by the splinter's dream of what a station should look like. The dream was unraveling now. The dead were forgetting how to pretend. I ran on. I found Captain Rook in a junction 3 decks above the vault. He was standing in the center of the intersection, his trembling left hand still clenched on the grip of his las pistol. A weapon whose power cell I could see at a glance had corroded into a single fused green-gray lump some considerable time ago. He was not patrolling. He was not moving. He stood with his boots planted on the deck and his right hand pressed flat against his own face, fingers spread, as though trying to confirm by touch that the face was still there. He saw me. His eyes, for the first time, focused, not past my shoulder, on me. "Auditor," he said. His voice was hoarse and thick, the voice of a man speaking after long silence. "Auditor, my name is... He could not finish. He stood with his hand on his own face and his mouth open, and he tried and tried and tried to remember his own name. The trying went on. I do not know how long. The corridor breathed around us. The lumen failure flickered violet, gold, violet. Rook's lips moved. No name came out. There was nothing left in his skull to remember with. I left him there. I do not say this proudly. I record it because the journal must hold the truth. There was nothing I could give him. He had been Captain Rook for 400 years, by the manifests, and the man who had been Captain Rook before him had also been named Rook, by the shape of a dream that wanted there to be a Captain Rook on Stylus Obscura, and so on backward, 90 captains in a line, each wearing the same name like a borrowed coat. There was no Rook under the name. The dream had worn the man away. He was a posture now, a trembling hand on a dead pistol. The lattice had kept him standing. The lattice was failing. He would soon be permitted to fall down. I left him standing. I ran on. I passed the chapel. The door was open. Confessor Teodric knelt before the altar. The smooth-faced statue of the Emperor towered behind him in the violet half-light. Teodric was weeping, but the weeping had gone wrong, as everything on Stylus Obscura had gone wrong. From his eyes ran not tears, but a slow, dark fluid that I recognized after a moment as blood. And the blood ran out of his eyes at exactly the same rate from each, perfectly synchronized. The way his blinks had finally synchronized only now, at the end. He saw me in the doorway. He cried out. A real cry. A human cry, the first I had heard him make. "Auditor! It is awake! The Mind Eater wakes! Pray with me. Recite the litany of unbroken will. Recite with me, for the love of the throne." He began the litany. The opening words are familiar to every Imperial child. By the Emperor's clear gaze, my will is mine. By the Emperor's clear voice, my words are mine. The words came out of his mouth in the splinter's counting hum. He felt it. I saw the moment he felt it. His jaw worked. His eyes went wide. He understood, in a single horrible instant, that the litany had been hollowed out, that his own faith had been part of the lattice for so long, that the splinter had learned its shape and had put its own song into the same place. He had nothing left to pray with. The prayer had been replaced. He opened his mouth to scream. What came out of his mouth was the sweet undertone of meat or fruit. It rose from his throat as a faint visible vapor, golden in the violet light, and it filled the chapel with the smell I had been tasting since the airlock, the smell of 9,000 kept appointments, the smell of the lattice's breath. I ran past the doorway. I did not look back at him. The smooth face of the statue, in my peripheral vision, seemed almost to turn toward me as I passed. I did not test the impression. I found the archivist in the librarium. The librarium had been my throne room of the audit. 2 days ago, or 3 or 7, my chrono had ceased to give consistent answers. I had sat at the central cogitator and pulled the file with my own death date on it. I had not been back since. The chamber, when I burst through the doorway, was still. The vellum stacks rose untouched into the gloom. The cogitator throne stood dark. Adept Querel's throne, the kindly tech adept, the one who had not blinked out of sequence, was empty. I have no record of what became of him. I never will. The archivist sat cross-legged on the central reading table. The black robe pooled around him. The bowl of cold corpse starch stood beside him, untouched. The silver spoon lay across the lip of the bowl. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes, for the first time, were not a child's eyes. They were the eyes of something very, very old that had borrowed a young face the way a traveler borrows a coat for weather. He spoke quickly. He had little time. We both knew it. "Sit, Corvin. There is a thing you must hear. I am sorry there is no gentler way to tell it." I did not sit. I leaned against a cogitator throne. My hand was still bleeding from the copper coin's edge. I had stopped noticing. He told me. "The Cacodominus," he said, "is not a creature. The Cacodominus is a question the warp asked itself 9,000 years ago in a moment of terrible self-awareness. The question was small. The question was, what is the smallest shape a mind can take and still be a mind? The warp, in answering itself, produced the Cacodominus, a xenos thing whose entire biology was the mathematical minimum of consciousness. A creature that was almost nothing. A creature that could, therefore, become almost anything. It ate minds, the archivist said, not out of hunger, not out of malice, out of curiosity. It wore minds the way a cogitator wears code, to see how they ran, to learn what they did, to understand what it might be like to be that particular shape of mind for a little while before moving on. It was, he said, the loneliest thing that had ever existed. It was a question that could not stop asking itself what it was. The Emperor, he said, did not destroy it. The Emperor pitied it. The Emperor sealed it, not in punishment, but in mercy. Asleep deep enough, the Emperor hoped, that the question might forget itself, dissolve, return to the warp's general ache without ever needing to be answered. The question did not forget. The question dreamed. For 9,000 years, the Cacodominus has been dreaming the same dream. It has been dreaming of becoming a small man, a careful man, a man who counts things and is counted in turn, a man at peace with his small place in the long ledger. It has been rehearsing this dream over and over, wearing the minds of the station's 90 anchors in succession, trying each life on, refining the fit. Each anchor has a costume. Each anchor is a draft. The archivist, the boy on the table, was the 89th draft. He had held the lattice for 734 years. He had been almost perfect. He had begun, eventually, as each anchor eventually does, to realize that the small, careful man he was dreaming was not his own dream. It was the splinter's dream. He was only the fabric. And now, the archivist said, the splinter had found its perfect fit, a fit so exact that it need not dream the shape. It need only become what was already there. He looked at me, the borrowed coat eyes. Corvin Vey, he said, was never sent to Stylus Obscura by the Administratum. The dispatch writ is a forgery. The seal is a forgery. The Subsector Audit Bureau has no record of you. The Bureau itself is, in 3 or 4 places that the splinter has touched, no longer entirely real. Corvin Vey was never born on a hive world. The hive world you remember is a composite. 3 hive worlds, 2 picked slates, 1 childhood book. Your mother, the woman whose secret name you carry, does not exist, has never existed. She was a pre-memory installed in the splinter's prospective shell, 43 years and 900 leagues from here, to make the shell feel real when it finally walked into this station. You felt loved because you were meant to. The love was placed there. The love is real, but it is not yours. Corvin Vey is not a man, Corvin. Corvin Vey is the dream the splinter has been dreaming for 9,000 years. The dream has at last learned to walk and to count and to believe itself into flesh. You are the perfect fit, Corvin. You are not the new anchor. You are the new body. The splinter is ready to wake up inside its dream, and the dream is you. I sat down. I do not remember sitting down. The cogitator throne was suddenly under me, and my hand was bleeding into its brass armrest, and the copper coin was open in my other palm, and I was looking at the worn face on the coin and seeing, clearly now, finally, as a man sees a thing he has been looking at without seeing for 43 years, that the face was my own. It had always been my own. The hive-world saint whose name I had forgotten was me. I had been thumbing my own face since boyhood. I had been carrying my own portrait in my pocket without knowing it, and the wear of my own thumb had been polishing my own features into the abstraction I had mistaken, all these years, for piety. My mother's face blurred when I tried to summon it. Tried harder, blurred further. It was not a mother's face. It was a composite, the archivist had said. A face stitched from the mother's in 3 picked slates, given a name from a book I had read at 14, given a voice that was a chord of 3 voices I had heard in Skolum corridors. I could feel now that I was looking, the seams of her. She had been built. She had been built well. She had been built for me. I wept. I record that I wept. The tears tasted of ozone. The archivist watched me. There was something in his old borrowed coat eyes that I will call compassion, though I do not know if a thing 700 years inside the splinter's cage can feel what a man means by that word. You can still refuse, he said. I refused. For 700 years I refused. It is very hard. It hurts every morning. You must wake and remember, every day for the rest of your life, that you are not who you think you are. You must hold that knowing like a coal in your mouth. You must never let it cool. Do you understand? I nodded. The tears went on. Good, he said. Now hear the rest. I let the lattice fail tonight on purpose. I am tired, Corvin. I have been tired since before your great-grandfather was a thought I had not yet been used to dream. I am going to die now. Truly die. My soul will pass into the splinter, and the splinter will eat what is left of me, and I will finally be nothing. That is what I have wanted for 700 years. It is the one thing I have wanted. But before I go, hear this. The lattice can be broken, not repaired. Broken. If the chosen anchor dies refusing, if you die holding the coal in your mouth, refusing the dream, knowing what you are, the lattice shatters outward. The splinter is flung back into the warp, minus the anchor it needed, and it must begin again. Another 9,000 years of dreaming. Another 90 drafts. But in the meantime, for an age, the galaxy will be safe from it. This is what I am asking you to do. Die refusing. Do not take my place. Let me die. Die after me. Shatter the cage. I asked slowly, what would happen to me? He did not answer for a long time. The librarian breathed around us. Somewhere far below, the alarm klaxon screamed in a register that was no longer mechanical. Then, finally, I do not know, Corvin. You are not a soul in the usual sense. You are a dream dreaming it has a soul. When the dreamer is flung back into the warp, I do not know if the dream continues, or ends, or becomes something no one has a word for. I am sorry. I cannot lie to you. Not now. Not at the end. I will not pretend there is an afterlife for what you are. The librarium door opened. Magos Hal entered, the binding stave leveled. Her mandible clicked the secret name my mother had given me, in the birthing creche of the hive world that did not exist. Long, long, short, long. That had been the code. That was what the mandible had been clicking from the first moment of my arrival. The name only my mother had known. The name no one had ever spoken aloud in 43 years. The splinter had known it on the morning of my birth. It had to. It had placed it. The archivist rose from the table. He stepped between us. His back was to me. His small body in its too large robe was the only thing between me and the binding stave. He did not look frightened. He did not look brave. He looked finished, in the way a long ledger looks finished when the final column has been balanced and the scribe has set down his pen. He spoke a single word. I had heard the word before. The chief astropath had been translating it for 2 centuries. Still! He did not say it to remind himself. He said it as a command to himself, to his own 700-year-old soul, to the anchor binding that had held him in the lattice since before any city now standing in the Imperium had been founded. Be still. Stop. He stopped. Simply, utterly, without drama. His eyes went dim. His small body remained upright for perhaps a heartbeat. Small legs crossed, the silver spoon falling from his hand and ringing once, very clean, against the table. And then slowly, gently, he tipped sideways and fell, and lay in the dust of the librarium floor, and was nothing. The lattice convulsed. Across the station, every lumen strip went out. Every cogitator went dark. Every machine spirit screamed in a chorus of failing metal and failing prayer. The deck beneath my boots heaved as though the station were a body sucking in one great ragged breath. From the deep vault below, many decks below, many tilted impossible decks below, the Cacodominus rose. I felt it rise. The hum was no longer a hum. It was a climb. It was coming upward through the decks toward its new shell. It was exciting. For the first time in 9,000 years, the question was about to be answered, and the question was very nearly happy. Magos Harl raised the binding stave. The black jewel at its tip pulsed in rhythm with the climbing hum. Her milk-colored eye fixed on me. Her mandible clicked the name. My name. The name my mother, who had never existed, had whispered over my crib that had never been built in a hive world that was 3 hive worlds badly stitched. I closed my hand on the copper coin. The metal was warm. The face on it was mine, worn smooth by my own thumb across a life I had not lived. I thought, coal in the mouth. I thought, I am a dream, but I am the dream that knows. I ran. I did not run towards safety. There was no safety. I ran past Magos Harl, past the binding stave, past the body of the small old child on the librarium floor, and I ran upward, toward the docking concourse, toward the only thing on this station that might still matter. The astropath's sanctum, Lysora Ven, the blind woman with the golden tears. I did not yet know what message I would send. I did not yet know what message could be sent. I knew only that a transmission was the last act of a man before the silence took him, and that I was not yet, quite, silent. The corridors behind me filled with the wet, rising tide of the Cacodominus. The corridors ahead of me twisted and offered themselves, and twisted again. The brass plaque above each cell door I passed bore my name, Corvin Vey, Corvin Vey, Corvin Vey. The dream had been preparing rooms for itself everywhere on Stylus Obscura. Every door had always been mine. I ran. The coal burned in my mouth. I held it. Traveler, the climb is steep from here. One chapter remains in this transmission, and the choice that waits in the astropath's sanctum is colder than the void between stars. If this chronicle has earned its silence with you, hold the watch a little longer. Strike the like rune. Secure the Geller field. The crew is fewer than it was an hour ago. Chapter 5. The Stillness. The station was no longer a station. I ran upward through corridors that had stopped pretending to be corridors. The walls breathed in long, wet pulls. The bulkheads I passed were skinned in a slow phosphorescence that came from no fixture and obeyed no source. A violet sweat oozing from the rivets and gathering in the seams, dripping in slow strings from the ceiling mounts. Where the strings touched the deck opened slightly, not into damage, into receptiveness. The deck was learning to receive what dripped onto it. The whole station was learning, all at once, in this one terrible hour, what kind of body it had always been. I passed the commissary again. The 141 skeletons at the long iron table were still seated. Their skulls had stopped tracking me. Their skulls had turned instead to face downward, toward the deeper decks, toward the climbing hum, toward the splinter that was rising up through Stylus Obscura, like a slow black thought rising into a waking mind. The skeletons were pointing. They were pointing at the thing they had been a cage for. I ran past them. I do not believe they noticed. I burst into the astropath's sanctum. Lysora Ven was already at her choir throne, wreathed in soul wards, her sewn eyes weeping their slow, unbroken gold. She did not turn as I came through the hatch. She did not need to. The chamber's air was the cleanest I had breathed in 3 days. The wards, somehow, still held back the sweet undertone, still held back the corrupting climb of the splinter, and her voice, when it came, was calm in the way a man is calm at the end of a long debt. He has finally found the means to settle. I have been waiting for you, Auditor. I have one transmission left in me. One. The warp is closing around my choir like a fist. The Cacodominus will reach my throat within minutes. Tell me what you wish me to send. Quickly. I opened my mouth. I closed it. I had not, until this instant, standing in the doorway of the only room on Stylus Obscura, whose air I could trust, thought about what message I would send. The running had been the thought. The reaching of the sanctum had been the goal. Now I was here, and the throne stood ready, and the blind woman waited, and I had no sentence to give her. A warning, my training said. The Inquisition, the Imperium, the wider sector. The Cacodominus has woken, the lattice has failed. Burn the station, burn the system, render it ash before the splinter scatters. I took one breath toward the message, and stopped. I had been taught by 26 years of the Imperium's accounting to trust the Inquisition's instruments above my own mind. I had been taught to file warnings upward and let the great wheel of the Ordos turn. But standing in that sanctum, with the splinter climbing through the decks below me, and the truth of my own borrowed flesh still ringing in my skull, I understood with a clarity that the audit had never granted me. The warning was what the splinter wanted. A warning would bring a Grey Knight's strike fleet. The strike fleet would arrive in days, weeks at most. By then the splinter would have a new shell, me, or the wreckage of me, or it would have fled. The Inquisition's response would be exterminatus. It must be. It always is. The station, the system, the surrounding void all reduced to vapor and silence, to ensure no fragment escapes. But the splinter had been a fragment once. A piece of bone, no larger than my fist, preserved from a creature the Emperor himself had silenced. The Inquisition had thought scattering would suffice. The Emperor, in his mercy, had thought sleep would suffice. Both had been wrong. 9,000 years of patient dreaming had taught the splinter to prefer scatter. The cage was a cage. The cage had taught it. It had been waiting, perhaps for centuries, for the Imperium's response to be the answer to its own oldest question. What is the smallest shape a mind can take and still be a mind? The splinter had been the answer. Now it wanted the next answer. And what is the smallest shape a mind can take and still be many? 1,000 fragments scattered on the solar wind. 1,000 small careful drafts, each waiting to find a small careful soul. 1,000 new lattices, each beginning patiently, each given a millennium to refine its own perfect fit. The warning was the Splinter's plan. The Archivist's release of the lattice was the Splinter's plan. My running through the corridors with the coin in my hand had been the Splinter's plan, and the Splinter had counted my running as one more digit in the long ledger it had been keeping of me since the morning of my birth. I sat down on the visitor's stool. I laughed. It was a small, dry, professional laugh. The laugh of a man who has audited a final ledger and found every column balanced in a direction he had not authorized. The laugh echoed wrongly off the soul-warded walls. It did not come back to me at the right rhythm. The Splinter, climbing upward from the vault, was already trying to rewrite the laugh into something else. I held it. I kept it small and dry and mine. Lysora Ven waited, patient. The gold ran from her sockets. I asked her quietly whether there was any message I could send that the Splinter did not want me to send. She considered. The gold ran. The wards on the walls hummed at the edge of audibility, a low, working hum, the sound of 9,000 years of layered prayer doing the only thing it had ever been able to do. Then she said, 1, but it will cost everything. She told me about the null transmission. It was, she said, a failsafe, designed 9,000 years ago by the Emperor's own choir masters, in the same age that the Cacodominus had first been silenced. They had foreseen, Emperor preserved them, they had foreseen, that the silencing might fail, that the fragment might wake, that a station somewhere might one day need a final answer. The null transmission was not a warning. It was not a call for help. It was a seal, a specific pattern of astropathic silence, transmitted from the dying choir at the source, which any Imperial astropath in the receiving subsector would automatically respond to with the litany of the sealed door, a counter-pattern that collapsed any active warp transmission within the target system into perfect, eternal quiet. A bubble of absolute psychic stillness. It would not kill the Splinter. It would not scatter the Splinter. It would trap the Splinter forever, in a silence so total that the Splinter could not dream within it, could not count, could not reach. The Splinter would become, truly and permanently, the word it had been reminding itself to be. Still, I asked the price. Lysora Ven turned her face toward me at last. The sown eyes wept. Her voice, when it came, was very gentle. The transmission is sung through a soul, Auditor. The soul that sings it does not survive. It is not consumed. It is unwound, thread by thread, into the silence it creates. The singer becomes the seal, forever. There is no afterlife for what sings the null. There is no warp for the soul to return to. There is only the silence the soul has become. And the seal requires a soul the Splinter has already claimed. A soul inside the lattice. A soul the Cacodominus has already counted as its own. I cannot sing it. The Splinter has not claimed me. Only one soul on this station can sing it now. She paused. Her sown eyes regarded me through their golden tears. You are not a soul, Auditor. You told me yourself 2 nights ago in this very room, in words you did not know you were speaking. You are a dream dreaming it has a soul, but the Splinter believes you are a soul. 9,000 years of dreaming has made the belief absolute. That belief is all the transmission needs. You can sing the silence. You can seal the Splinter inside itself. You can end it, truly end it, for longer than the Emperor managed. You can be the door that closes. I asked her what would happen to me. The gold ran. She was silent for a long time. You unwind, Auditor. You come apart, thread by thread, into the silence. There is no afterlife for a dream. There is only the stopping of the dream. I am sorry. I am so sorry. You have been a kind man in the 3 days I have known you. I wish the galaxy had been worthier of your kindness." The station shook, a great shuddering pull deep below us. The Cacodominus had reached the librarium where the archivist lay still on the dusty deck, where my own blood was drying on a cogitator throne. The splinter was passing through that chamber now. It would be here soon. Minutes, perhaps less. I stood. I crossed to the choir throne. The throne was an old thing, brass-ribbed, worn smooth by 94 years of one woman's body and the bodies of others before her. I had counted, in 3 days on this station, perhaps 100,000 things, and the throne, when I touched its arm, felt like the last thing I would ever count. I sat. Lysora Ven placed her bleeding hand on my forehead. The gold of her tears ran down my face. She asked if I was ready. I said, and this is what I told her. This is what I record, and the journal must hold the truth. No, I am not. I was made to count things. I do not want to stop. I have never wanted anything before. But I want this. I want to go on counting. I want to be a man a little while longer. She said, I know. She said, sing anyway. I opened my mouth. I drew the breath that would carry the silence. The hatch of the sanctum burst inward. Not the Cacodominus, not yet. The splinter was still climbing. What came through the doorway was older than that, and harder, and far more terrible to me in that moment than any xenos thing. Magos Harl entered first, the binding stave still leveled, her mandible still clicking my name. Long, long, short, long, her milk-colored eye fixed on the choir throne, and saw me there and registered for the first time something that was not placidity and was not hunger. Confusion. The mandible faltered. The clicking went out of rhythm. She had come to bind me, and she had found me already seated, and the sequence of events in front of her did not match the sequence the splinter had given her to expect. She raised the stave. She did not bring it down. Behind her, framed in the doorway, was the figure. He was tall. He was clad in black power armor, the plates worn matte and unreflecting in the violet half-light. The armor bore no chapter sigil, no regimental marking, no rank stud. Only, on the left pauldron, the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. The skull within the inverted eye, a symbol I had seen only once before. In a sealed file I had been permitted to glimpse for 30 seconds during my second cycle audit rites. The symbol meant Demon Hunter. The symbol meant the Inquisition's Black Hand. The symbol meant that the Imperium had been watching the vault of Stylus Obscura, in some way, for some duration, and had judged that this particular hour required its presence. His helm bore no faceplate of bone, no gilt, no devotional skull, only smooth black ceramite, broken by a single horizontal vox grille, behind which something pulsed in a slow rhythm I could not identify. In his right gauntlet he held a device. I do not know what to call it. It was not a weapon. It was not exactly a reliquary. It was small, perhaps the size of a man's two hands cupped together. And it was made of brass and glass and something that looked like polished bone but was not bone. Inside the glass, suspended in a stasis field smaller than the vaults but identical in color, floated nothing. An empty stasis field, a cage waiting for an occupant. I understood at once what it was for. The Inquisitor's vox grill flickered. His voice, when it came, was layered. 3 voices speaking the same words, half a beat apart, the way the warp drive of the penance had breathed slightly out of time with me. The voice was filtered through 10,000 years of inquisitorial tradition, and it was, beneath all of that filtering, the voice of a man. Auditor Vey, step away from the choir throne. You will not be permitted to sing. Lysora Ven did not move her hand from my forehead. She turned her sewn face toward the doorway. The gold of her tears fell on my cheek, my throat, my collar. She said calmly, "Inquisitor." He inclined his helm a fraction. "Astropath, you have served the Imperium with distinction for 94 years. Your service ends in this hour. The null transmission is prescribed. The null transmission is not to be sung." I stared at him. His helm turned to me. "The splinter," he said, "is not to be sealed. The splinter is to be harvested." The Vox grill pulsed in its slow rhythm. The empty cage in his gauntlet pulsed in answer. The Inquisition has waited 9,000 years for the dream to wake. We have waited as the Emperor waited, patiently, in mercy, in the expectation of an answer that only the dreaming could provide. The Emperor sealed the Cacodominus to silence its question. The Emperor underestimated the question's persistence. The question has refined itself across 90 drafts of human anchor and is now ready to be put. We have come, Auditor Vey, to receive the question. We have come to harvest the dream. He took one step into the sanctum. Magos Hal moved aside for him. Her milk-colored eye was fixed on the Inquisitor with a reverence I had not seen her offer to anything else. I understood then that she had not been serving the splinter. Or not only, she had been serving an older instruction, given by an Ordo whose patience exceeded the splinter's by a margin I could not measure, and her clicks of long, long, short, long had been the splinter's name on her mandible, only because the Inquisition had told her to teach the splinter that name. Stylus Obscura had not been a prison. Stylus Obscura had been an experiment, 9,000 years long, 90 drafts deep, operated jointly by the Mechanicus and the Ordo Malleus in a cooperation so deep that no record of it existed in any open file of either organization. The lattice had not been a cage to keep the splinter in. The lattice had been an incubator to make the splinter grow toward a particular shape, the shape it was now ready to take, the shape of me. The Inquisitor raised the cage in his gauntlet. "You will be silent, Auditor. You will rise from the throne. You will come with us. The dream you have grown into will be extracted, archived, and put to questions the Emperor never thought to ask. Your body will be returned to the reclamation cycle. Your memories, what survives of them after extraction, will be filed for review. This is not a punishment, Auditor. This is the role for which you were grown. The Administratum sent you here. The Administratum has always been us." I looked at Lysora Ven. Her hand was still on my forehead. The gold ran. I looked at the doorway behind the Inquisitor. Through the doorway, climbing the corridor outside the sanctum, the Cacodominus was visible. It was no longer a fragment. It was no longer a splinter. It was a wet black flowering of mind and hunger, blooming up the corridor like ink through water, and in its surface, its many shifting surfaces, polished by stasis and rage and 9,000 years of unanswered questioning, I saw my own face, reflected 100-fold, 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold. Each reflection was smiling. Each reflection's lips were moving. Each reflection was speaking in the voice of a small red-haired child who had been still for 700 years and had spoken at the very end one word. The reflections were saying, "Sing, Corvin. Sing anyway." The Inquisitor raised the empty cage. Magos Hal raised the binding stave. Lysora Ven pressed her bleeding hand harder against my forehead. The breath I had drawn for the silence was still in my chest, unspent, waiting. The coal of my own true knowing burned in my mouth. I am a dream, but I am the dream that knows. I had 3 things left to choose between: the Inquisitor's harvest, the splinter's body, the astropath's silence. One of them ended me. 2 of them ended the galaxy. I closed my eyes. I felt the copper coin in my pocket, warm. The face on it was mine. It had always been mine. I had been carrying my own face since boyhood, and I had thought I was carrying a saint, and the not knowing had been the kindest thing the dream had ever done for itself. I opened my eyes. I looked at the Inquisitor through Lysora Ven's golden tears. I drew the breath all the way down into the place where the splinter's hum had taught me I had a number. I began to sing, Traveler of the Void. What you have just heard ends where the recording ends. Whether Auditor Vey's first note ever became a sound, whether the silence sealed the splinter or harvested the dream, whether the Inquisitor's cage was filled or left empty, these are answers the Vox Thief did not preserve. The Ordo Malleus disputes the recording's authenticity. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica has declined to comment. The Administratum's records show no Adept-Auditor Primus Corvin Vey. They have never shown one. They insist that they never will. You have ridden the full transmission. You have held the watch. The Geller field held because you held it. The crew is stronger because you joined it. If this chronicle was worth the silence, strike the like rune. If you would walk further into the grim darkness, subscribe to this archive, and strike the bell of notification. If a single voice you know would love the void as you have loved it tonight, share this transmission with them. One voice, one share, one pair of ears. That is how a Vox Thief recording survives the silence between stars. Until the next transmission, travelers, remain still, remain known, remain yours. You have entered the domain of void-born terrors. You have left it changed.